everyone, and thank you for joining our Matchmaker session today. My name is Hannah Stoesz, and I'm the Communications and Events Assistant for CityLAB Hamilton. Matchmaker events are where we learn more about the projects that have been submitted by staff members and work with our faculty members to try and find good student, faculty, and staff partnerships to tackle the projects. Today, we will be joined by Sarah Mombourquette, Animal Services Supervisor, as well as Brad Potts, Manager at Animal Services, under the Planning and Economic Development Department in the City of Hamilton. So Sarah brings us a challenge to develop a volunteer program for the City Animal Services. First, I would love to just hear a little bit about your role, Sarah, here at the city and how your work impacts Hamiltonians.
Hi, thanks, Hannah. Very excited to be here with CityLABs. So our challenge is a volunteer program. I'm a supervisor with City of Hamilton Animal Services. So we have a unique sheltering system here within the city. And I supervise sort of the flow of animals that we get that is involved in our city. And for the most part, that's going to involve a whole varied degree of animals, including wildlife, sometimes livestock, but the bulk of the animals that we do work with on a daily basis are domestic animals. So pocket pets, cats, dogs. The scope of our work includes, for the most part, we are a municipally funded shelter. So there are various types of shelters within the province, each with their own mandate and wheelhouse. We are obligated and mandated by law to provide sort of the old school, what a lot of people will call pound keeping services. But essentially, in today's day and age, it is lost and found. So when a pet strays away from home, our role is to try and locate an owner and do some reuniting. We also enforce municipal bylaws. So any of our bylaws that are going to affect residents in ensuring that there is responsible pet ownership throughout the city is certainly an enforcement standpoint. So essentially, we're a mix of education, enforcement, support, and encouragement for the residents of Hamilton as it relates to animals. Is that a good summary? I think it's a good summary.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. Next, I'd love to hear a bit about the challenge, maybe relevant background information or key objectives for the challenge that you're presenting.
Yeah, so the project is looking at, the challenge that we're proposing here is developing a framework for a volunteer program at Animal Services. And what that framework would include is how do we incorporate community members and residents to participate in the wellness and needs of animals in our city. As a result of animals coming into us as lost, there are unfortunately times they're just not claimed. So they stay with us and they stay in our care. And in order to level up and provide the best care that we can be providing, be really what we're looking for is incorporating residents to volunteer with us and provide some additional initiatives. So the challenge is also looking at what do those initiatives look like and how do they work in an animal shelter. So building that sort of framework here to figure out where are the gaps? So helping to identify where those gaps are and how volunteers could play an integral role in filling those gaps for us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for bringing this challenge forward. It sounds very interesting. What are some of the challenges and needs Animal Services is currently experiencing in this post-COVID era?
Well, certainly the biggest challenge that we have at the shelter has been an unprecedented amount of animals. So we really are seeing a lot of cats, a lot of dogs, and a lot of small animals. And they're keeping our shelter at capacity for long periods of time. So that's certainly been a recent challenge. So looking at, again, how we can integrate into some framework, some ideal moderate stay, and it could be anywhere from short-term, moderate term, or long-term stay for animals. Our goal is never long-term, but for the amount of time they're with us, volunteers would play a great role, and what does that volunteer role look like? Where would the opportunities lie for volunteerism at our animal shelter? It could be dog walking, cat socializing, small animals socializing. And another challenge would be for us is how we would roll out that framework with staff that are really stretched thin. So how are we incorporating the staff and the volunteers working together with such limited staffing at this point? And I've certainly, there's also some really great other initiatives that we've seen out in the city, volunteers to increase volunteerism, if that makes sense. So I think part of the challenge that I would also include in there is thinking a little bit outside of the box. Perhaps our participants who are tasked with the challenge can look at what is beyond dog walking or what is beyond cat socializing, and think outside of the box as far as what does volunteering mean, and how can it be of help to the animal shelter.
Yeah. You touched on it, but I would love to hear a bit more about what you imagine being some of the challenges of creating and operating a volunteer program.
Yeah, it's just the challenges would be looking at doing some of the, finding out some primary research, some secondary research for us on, what are the community perspectives right now? So animal sheltering has changed over the years. And, the challenge is us being able to determine what should it look like post-COVID, what should it look like, 2023, and what are the residents and the community members, what are their perspectives, and how do they want to participate? Yeah.
Yep. I'm curious if you have any other municipalities or animal services in mind that operate successful or just generally operate volunteer programs that could be used as reference.
Yeah, volunteerism is in the animal sheltering world has sort of always been around. And I think historically, you can look at a lot of humane societies or SPCAs who traditionally have always had volunteer work. Municipally run shelters, there are some specific sets of considerations. So certainly that is a big one to look into. I do know that Toronto Animal Services does have a volunteer program. I understand Mississauga Animal Services has a volunteer program. Most of the larger scale municipalities do have some integrated volunteer programs up and running that could be used as reference and jurisdictional scans.
Yeah, thank you. This was also touched on, but capacity-wise, what kinds of limitations do you foresee with training and support volunteers?
Yeah, so that would be a whole area, I think, within the challenge to examine and get some research on. So I think that would be a very exciting research point from a challenge basis is, for us, how do we integrate? There's going to be certain factions of animals that volunteers may not be able to interact with. So, health and safety wise, making sure that we have that base of understanding built right within the framework again, I think that falls back on, again, building the understanding of, how we flow staff to volunteers and ensure that there is a good flow of information and what training would look like there to best support them, but also have, a sets of rules that go along with volunteering.
Yeah, and as it goes for commitment, what kind of commitment do you hope volunteers will have?
Yeah, I think our goal is looking at a timeline for commitment is likely going to vary depending on what the specific volunteer position is. So, you know, a volunteer position for dog walking might look like a little bit different of a time commitment than, say, someone who would be potentially willing to help out in social media type commitment.
Yeah.
Right. So I do think there's going to be some varied considerations to look into. For us, I think we're looking at, you know, depending on the role. So it's going to be completely dependent on the role. If it's something like a dog walker, we're probably looking at a commitment of, you know, once to twice a week per volunteer. But then when we start going down the path of exploring and finding out, you know, really beneficial volunteer positions that fall outside of that box, then there certainly can be commitments that, you know, aren't quite as stringent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then just on a more specific level, I'm curious what kind of tangible deliverables you're hoping to come out of this with.
Yeah, so definitely we're hoping for the challenge that we'd get that framework and like essentially a volunteer program guide. Yeah. And within that guide would include, again, sort of that primary research, that secondary research that supports that this framework, you know, has shown to be successful. And certainly in working with the group throughout the challenge, be able to provide, you know, sort of our demographics and our exact numbers, and then, you know, have them really develop that sort of guide. Let us know what is the best practices going on right now for sheltering, and deliver a really great guide would be fantastic.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate your time. And that concludes our Matchmaker session for today.